GM, Mitch, NeverFade, EP3. We broke it up into segments last time for EP2. I liked it. Exclusively on X. I think we upload the full lengths on YouTube. So, we hit the little versionings on X and we go full lengths on YouTube. I think that's going to be the move going forward. How you been, boss?
Busy.
You're grinding right now.
Yeah, 60 days to the eclipse. Trying to keep half an eye on airdrops. Got my claim on the dimension. Looking pretty good.
Yeah, you're living.
Held on to those mad lads.
Yeah, you're living in a different dimension right now because you just casually throw out like 60 days to the eclipse. People are probably like, dude, is this guy that lunar? Like, is he just programmed? He's pretty lunar. All right, dude. So we have been talking about AI and on-chain for the longest time. I think we were focused at the beginning of 23. We were heavily focused on-chain. At Q1, ears started peaking to like what happens when AI happens on chain. The summer of 23, when the whole world was drunk on their despair of crypto and the on-chain world, pivoted over to AI, got obsessed with ChatGPT, probably never figured out what GPTs actually stood for as an acronym, obsessed with it. But we never gave up on the intersection between on-chain and AI. And I think the general thesis was, the internet is built for robots and AI is destined for it. And on-chain crypto is built for economic energy and humans can benefit from it. And that's kind of like the core thesis of each of those things. And it's been wild to hold those two beliefs and try to get them to magnetize and come closer and closer together, because each week new technology is getting introduced to make these concepts become full-fledged realities in a pre-AGI era. So that's where I want to dig into it with you, is crypto, AI, the intersection. We just had the UETH blog come out about crypto and AI and their synergies. Vitalik followed up with it 7 days later on his blog about how it could actually be a marriage in heaven in the post-AGI world. And then you have smaller thought pieces that have been coming out around how AI and crypto just make sense. So we're here. This is going to be a meta in summer where applications are being used and people are finally getting it. But when it comes to the think boys, the thought piece boys, like they're already there. It just takes a long time for this information to trickle down. And it takes some graphical, UI, UX interfaces of button clicking. Crypto AI, like I know right now in your Neuralink brain, by the way, congrats on the surgery. I'm glad you were the first one to get it. I know in that Neuralink brain of yours, like you're gonna drop what you're thinking crypto AI on me, and we're gonna parse it right there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of places you can go, in terms of like, I think there's different intersections. I think you can go like, so you talk about blockchain and incentivization, and I think there's also an authentication component to it as well. Like as we go into this world of a higher fidelity creation of media that's made possible by the amount of GPUs that are being put to it, and improved models that can, LLMs all the way to image and video creation. We're going to be going into kind of a scary world. Like, I think some people probably watched the Tucker interview with Putin, and how do we actually authenticate that what was put online and what we watched was reality?
Great
I
point. And
think
actually, it's why I did not watch it, is because of my doubts and the infidelity.
Yeah, and then so you have, I mean, we still live in this world of like influencers, and how do I know that somebody was where they were when they said they were and they said what they said? And so I think there's a pretty interesting use case around like some type of like geographic zero knowledge proof, that a platform could utilize to ensure that the user created this content, and then that's like this it's just a truth platform. So I think that's interesting. I think going back to the incentivization component of it, the narratives that I'm seeing in the space, incentivizing well-performing AI models, like I think like the bit tensor kind of thesis there. And then going beyond that, like just having a native token to essentially rent GPUs that could be used for the powering of these models. I think that's a pretty like logical and pretty easy to grok type of thing. You also have, we talk about GPUs, all this amount of like computing power that's needed to basically power this digital world. There's going to be a lot of inefficiencies across another huge usage of GPU, which is validating the network. And so I think there's some interesting like trade-offs there. Like when you look at like power grids for cities, right? Like one of the downsides of like powering your city with wind or with solar is that it's not super efficient as it could be with but a traditional like fossil fuel or something that you can just turn on and off whenever you want to. So the same way as demand ebbs and flows for these two different things, you can kind of balance it out. And again, kind of governing that with smart contracts, and creating markets for those things, I think is inherently what's going to happen as we try to become as energy efficient as possible as a civilization. Going to energy cost zero obviously is the goal, but the lead up to that is going to have to be, just getting better at using our resources for computing power.
Yeah, and that's a take there, because I mean, I know we could go deeper on that topic, but to kind of peel back a little bit, talking about decentralizing GPUs, that's in line with the topic of quantum computing and the idea of quantum computing with Google. I even think IBM's like a big quantum computing player, but the centralized companies that have the beat on quantum computing, it can easily have competitors with consumer computing. And I think that if we even look at the stock market and we look at the distribution and the supply and demand of GPUs, if you're investing in AMD or NVIDIA because you believe that GPUs are only going to increase in demand, I think you're right. But there's a lot of execution risk in investing in those companies that are producing those products. It might be profitable, but the real kind of like, if you believe that the demand in those GPUs are going through the roof and the supply is low, then you probably inherently should believe that giving people economic opportunity to use their graphic cards to plug into bigger networks to power the consumerism of it is going to be massive. And I think we've even seen it with consumer GPTs, creative GPTs like Midjourney. It's taking longer on the freer tiers to produce those images. The GPUs are not as available as that demand's increasing. And those price per licenses are only going to go up because GPUs are going to be in demand and low in supply. So it's like that GPU staking mechanism, which it kind of gets into that roll up dApp area. That is huge. And we have the infrastructure built for staking nodes for 10 years. And I do want to credit like peer-to-peer music sharing with the Kazas and the LimeWires back in the day. Like, we wouldn't be where we were on the decentralization of nodes if it weren't for that. And we wouldn't be where we are in the decentralization of GPUs if it wasn't for our decentralization of nodes. We're there. We're there with the scale and the distribution. My question for you is, like, how long until this is a reality?
I don't know what a more like real world use case, if you call it the real world, I guess, but like, I don't know what a more important narrative of this cycle is going to be. Like, some may argue that like we already are like backroom AGI, like, all the drama that happened with OpenAI, like, there's a conspiracy theories that like, oh shit, they actually, you know, they saw it, it was there, and then they freaked out and they tried to make some changes because they were trying to figure out like how, like they needed to go like worldwide with this news. People I talked to at these like futurist symposiums and stuff like that, I mean, it's like generally like 2 years away, potentially. And so it kind of feels like we got to figure this shit out sooner than later, because not
We're
that like it's going to be
your statement is that we have 2 years left in the pre-AGI era. Max.
I'm saying, okay, that's a possibility, right? And so like the rate of change is going to increase exponentially. And if we don't have some of these frameworks in place, then we may not be in control of the frameworks and how they're built.
Yeah, and when you say frameworks, when you say frameworks, just to like define it a little bit more directly, you're saying networks, right? Like, if we don't have the networks for AGI to crawl in a post-AGI world that have a human economic benefit, it's too late.
Yeah, I'm not really trying to be like dystopian or apocalyptic about it, but I just feel like kind of water finds its level, and how do we train things? We train things that we're not totally in control of with incentives.
Yep.
And if those incentive frameworks via the networks,
yep,
being fully built out, are not there, then an entity is left to try to figure that out on their own. And when their pace of iteration far exceeds the pace that we can keep up with, then we may be less in control of that situation than we would have hypothetically wanted to be.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm like, I think like what we've been talking about, communities can go, with the right tools, communities can move faster than an individual. And so I think that's a place that I'm super interested in, is this like cross collaborative creation and incentivization around that. For me, kind of synthesizes the amount of computing power and reach that one of these more modern models could have.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't think you're being, apocalyptic at all. I think it's very similar to climate risk, right? It's like we understand fixed limits of resources. We understand there's risk, and you put in solutions to try to get in front of it or be a little bit more preventative. I guess it's reactive actually, but you try to solve the problem. And I think that's where we are with AGI. The real problem is, though, it's hard for people to grasp what AGI is, to be honest. Like, people think AI is already here, but AI is as modules, as GPTs, but it's not AGI. And I think that like the amount of people that understand what a post AGI world will look like is very low. And that's a little concerning to me, but I do have like belief in our systems to be able to get there and build there. One thing
you said some people don't know. Do you want to go into just briefly what we feel like that means?
Yeah. I don't think it's like, I don't think it has a clear definition, but I'd be interested in your take as well. But my initial take is like, right now we're in the GPT, we're in a pre-AGI era, but GPTs basically will take human input and then provide a computational output. And AGI means that it's a sentient being in its own right, and it doesn't require human input to interact. It thinks like a conscious human being. It doesn't need any man behind the curtain. It doesn't need any type of controller. It is its own being. And so in an AGI world, AGI essentially would mean that computers that would be looked at as beings by some organizations and entities, like they would be looked at as beings, will be interacting on networks on their own without any type of direction, and therefore without any type of control limits. I would argue that any AGI agent that has, a backdoor, or any AGI agent that has control parameters, is not actually AGI. I would call that an automated GPT, something that a human can override. But AGI actually will crawl the internet on its own. It will send requests and it will ingest responses on its very own accord. What is your definition of AGI?
The concept of being self-taught versus trained, I think, is the simplest way to boil it down, right? Like, it can intake information and then make its own independent decisions and indicate or be able to pass some level of tests. And I mean, that's how we would, I think that's ultimately how we'll determine, are we here, A, D, B, C, like that type of like marker on the calendar. The post AGI world is where, I imagine we'll be just watching a video clip at some point, and there will have been a number of public tests of like quote unquote intelligence, and it will, up until that point, it will be like, it'll pass a few of the questions and it will fail the next. And then at some point, all of the questions will be answered in a correct fashion, and we will be in a post AGI world. And then who knows, everybody thinks like the singularity event is like, and just be like, it's going to be instantaneous. And looking back on it in history, maybe it seems like that, but I think that's the question in my mind, is like, how, like, from a human perception, how does that actually occur and feel in the midst of all this other huge shifts that are happening in the atomic world as well. Like space travel and exploration, right? Like, that's moving, or that has the potential, if people's plans go according to what they want, that has the potential to move exponentially as well.
And I think with the, there's AGI that's going to pass a scientific test, and then there's AGI that's going to reach consensus in our population, and how big that gap is, I'm not sure, but I think the tipping point for the consensus is going to be when humans are getting trained by AGI, when humans are plugging into AGI videos to learn, when humans are getting, ultimately, like, passing through the veil of belief on AGI, where they can be affected by it. We see it today in the markets, market manipulation on the risk assets that are blessed by the SEC is one thing, but we see it very heavily in the crypto trading asset world, how much people are influenced by, kind of bot, manipulation on these charts and the way they get trained on the TL. So I think that's kind of already happening at that level. That's a very nut and bolt level, but I'm sure there are, bot accounts out there on Twitter that are heavily influencing buys and sells from humans on charts. So I think that's kind of like the first place we're seeing like a very minor use case of like AGI, but you can't really call it AGI because it's within its range, within its realm. So I think it's just very advanced programmatic GPTs. But off this topic, because we're getting really deep in it, and let's switch over to rollups, because on the last episode, you were bearish L2s. And for a reminder for the listeners, you were bearish L2s. I was not as bearish L2s, but I was bearish L2s without distribution points. So like I was bullish. I am bullish on like base as an L2. I'm bullish on optimism as an L2 because of rollups, which we'll get into. And otherwise, I think Solana really takes the use cases of most L2s. But now introduce the rollup world. Now, rollups are not new with this dimension airdrop. Rollups have been around, specifically ZK rollups, and optimism as an L2 has really kind of pioneered this idea of a super chain and the idea that everything will roll up into the optimism super chain. Now, I'm not seeing too much differentiation between what dimension is doing and what optimism is doing. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that like the more and more rollups that get connected to an L2 to scale on top of an L1 makes Ethereum absolutely unfadable. And I think we're already at that point. But I'd love your take. I would love to get your take on rollups, and specifically rollups versus L2s.
Yeah, rollups are, and I guess as Dimensions branding itself, roll apps, right? Like I think where L3s
roll up.
Yeah, roll
Keep
up,
that roll up printing.
Where it's kind of, for me, like where it starts to differentiate is like, we're moving more into this like niche world where like these micro communities are forming around very specific interests and incentives, and where basically the premise of like where anyone that that still like can basically map back to a settlement layer, EVM, capability, for instance, anyone can spin up their own app and private or semi-private chain really makes a ton of sense to me, in the way that there are inevitably going to be these kind of like smaller boundaries within a larger population that can cater and curate incentives and other like rule-based components to that specific use case. So it's it's almost as though like if just the component and just the benefits of an L2 in terms of like speed and transaction cost, as we mentioned, like we feel like there's already, whether it's Solana or like the Say network that's even now like touting like more impressive TPS and other type of like security and decentralization. I feel like just that this L2 timeframe could potentially be this thing we look back at, and I don't think they end up people calling them L3s necessarily, but it's this like interesting time frame where we didn't fully know what we needed yet. It doesn't mean that I think like all the L2s are going to die. I think like, obviously Optimism is set up well, and the fact that Base is built on Optimism and Base is part of Coinbase, like I think, I'm definitely not saying like, sell short, any of that. But I'm more interested, like as somebody that's thinking about building in the space and thinking about building actual use cases for communities and what they need to do together, the roll-apps just makes a ton of sense, and lucky enough to get that airdrop too.
Like it lowers the execution risk, right? Like it makes the scope small so that niche use cases can thrive. I honestly feel bad for L2s. Like I feel bad for like Arbitrum. I think Optimism is like, they were very focused on Superchain and rollups, and they kind of saw themselves as like, hey, let's do this L2 so nobody else has to make an L2 and they can just like L3. Rollups are L3s. Like I don't know what's going to win. Are we going to talk about those rollups or L3s, or are we just going to talk about those applications? Like that's the actual application layer. Probably that's it. But like Optimism was thinking ahead. I feel bad for Arbitrum. I feel bad for Polygon. I feel bad for anyone like making an L2 that's trying to boil an ocean when really all they have to do is provide people the compute space to bring their own niche use cases on. Like we're actively right now with Cake working on, trying to point creative GPT users at an on-chain use case, because we want to make sure that content creators have an economy before the post-AGI hits. And going back to that AGI conversation, one thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot about is like the original Open AI pitch deck. Like I think the third page, when it talks about the problem, or maybe the second page, it basically says like AGI without the right like human economical benefits is a dystopian world. I'm paraphrasing that, but that was the original thesis of why OpenAI was important to make that, and like why the investment to get in front of it was important. And here we are, and like we have a solution for these settlement layers where the human economy isn't void of benefit. And I think the only way we can do it is with a scalable settlement layer and decentralized inputs. And that is on chain. I mean, anybody wants to say like we could do it from a centralized standpoint, and we can go out and create a Web2 business that is the settlement layer for all humans and AGI events. The answer is no, because we're out of time. There's too much execution risk, and the valuation that you would need to require for that investment doesn't exist in the market caps of traditional asset classes right now. You have to rely on a network that's already built with humans that are ready to input. And we're here. It's on chain times AI using rollups to some degree.
I think you just paraphrased what Sam Altman's out there in the Middle East on his roadshow doing. Yeah, I mean, it's like it. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not just. I mean, I said it was a narrative, but I mean, I think it's the most important work that's happening in the space right now. So I think like what's interesting is. If
I want to change the world with investments right now, I'm just 25K checks to teams no bigger than 3 that are all technical, that are at the intersection of AI and on chain. I'm writing checks all day long.
Yeah.
that's how you can change the world with investment right now. Like, other than that, and this spans across all use cases. Like, this isn't just like, this isn't just technology. This is like technology that can apply to all problems where AI is happening. Like there just like even within the construction industry with building things, the AI that's happening in drones and rendering and all these things. Like, you do not need. I talked to a pretty high up builder that builds complex things for rich people, and ultimately, like, he is so bullish on AI for the sense that, like, you don't need architects, you don't need engineers. Like, your OpEx is shrinking because AI is taking all those things. You don't need renderers. You used to have to pay renderers by the hour, and the hour was slow because rendering requires significant GPU. AI is taking over that rendering as well. Shout out render. Like, it is, OpEx are shrinking because AI is taking over in other industries. And the reality is like, an on-chain network could allow people to contribute to building without having any idea of how to build in that production line.
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole nother can of worms, but rethinking our place in the world and our place in the workforce is definitely something that people are not probably ready to accept.
Right.
And in the same way of being early to these, like, crypto coin launches, right? I think this is like a more important, like, global being early to the party, because this is actually history changing times. These are, and
Facts.
I think as we talked about earlier, like, there is a very short window within which to operate here, at least as far as I can see. And so somebody's got to do it. And I think, like, the question of, like, is, yeah, what else is more important at the moment, and where can you see, like, a combination of value creation and wealth accumulation? Because let's be honest, like we're in the space because at least we're somewhat incentivized in that fashion. And I think
in the wealth, in the wealth creation,
wealth accumulation, wealth creation. Yeah. I mean, I think, like, we're, it comes hand in hand, but, like, to your point, I mean, like, there aren't valuation models that can properly assess what a complete change in global GDP looks like. So if you can participate in that, like, we're not talking about, pre-sale to public listing, right? Like, we're talking about the type of X's that no one's ever seen before.
Yep.
And some of these, like, net new technology use cases. And when you start thinking about, like, what our minds are good at, that probably have the longest defensibility against AGI, like, that's a double click into it. And where I think, like, where if you're vision casting, like, that's where you're saying, okay, like, how do I defend that for as long as possible, and make sure that I have the incentive structures and the frameworks in place so that I can maintain that both for myself and for this species.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I needed a new, $1 billion idea to go build on right now, I would be building bot prevention for prediction markets. Like, I think that when in this post AGI era, what humans are going to be really good at is convincing and organizing and influencing. Like, I don't think influencer spend is going anywhere but 3xing up, because people are still going to need to be influenced around what AGI they believe. And prediction markets are going to be the data set to drive those influential trends. So, you know, Elon can't really solve the bot problem of Twitter right now. I don't think he ever will until Twitter goes on chain, because I do think having some type of cost besides a subscription is important. It'll be interesting to see how Farcaster scales amongst consumer adoption with that model. I think there's obviously too much friction there. But yeah, like prediction markets, it's funny because prediction markets was originally what I thought was the first dApp on Ethereum. I think it was called Augur. Do you remember that? AUGUR?
Yeah.
Augur was like, I was bullish on it. I thought prediction markets was the base layer of anything that was going to invite speculation on top of it. And boy, like that idea was just way too early. Like the reality was it was a prediction market of people that were too smart. So it didn't work. Like you needed a prediction market of like the average person, and we're kind of there. So that's when people look at the on-chain world and they say it's a casino. Like, yeah, there's a portion of the casino, but that casino, those casino users, those degens are needed for prediction markets. Like you can't just have 18 TED talkers coming in and weighing in because they see light years away, and it's, 10 visionaries walk into a bar and you just like leave with nothing executed.
All right. So what does it all mean?
It means EP4 awaits us. We're going to record that one. I think this is a solid episode, dude. It was great connecting, and we'll get it out on X. We'll put it on YouTube, and we'll let it bang. I'm interested in feedback on this. This one's different, but hey, like NeverFade during a bear with salvaging, swerving, surviving, and NeverFade post bull transition. You're going to get a whole new lens.